know, it's like earth science. It goes back to my high school earth science class. I totally forgot the word for it, but whatever, or the phrase for it. But it's like an interface area where you have like it crosses over.
Well, that's
between,
what I mean. It's formed by the glaciers.
Yep.
So it actually, like, there's literally different layers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, you're right. You're right. So that's no, I think it's one of the more, like, it's one of those states that a lot of people don't.
Carolyn is suggesting moraine. I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
yeah. Now I gotta go. Now I gotta go waste some time this afternoon digging in
Into geology and
to my old. It's one of my favorite class. It was like a thing you couldn't,
Aaron,
unless you're really going to do it. Oh, hey, Richard, was that you? Sorry.
Yeah, can you make me host?
Me, or was that Zach has to make you host?
Oh, Zach is host now?
Yeah, he's the one that
created the confusion.
Yeah, triggered the event.
All right, so Zach, when you're ready, okay, I'm host now. Perfect.
Good. I wouldn't do that, Richard, without texting you. Unless it's an emergency. We were getting Zoom bombed or whatever, which you do a fantastic job in regulating that compared to a lot of other, of these meetings.
It just takes a lot to rattle me, so.
Yeah, I was just going to say that you don't get flustered easily.
Yeah, no, you have that lawyer's discourse, that ability to just sort of just like the asteroids hitting. You're like, but did they send the deposition in, before they hit the Earth?
Yeah.
Everyone else is running around crazy, and you're just like,
it's like, guys, the deposition has to be in a day. Like, we can't worry about this asteroid that's going to
exactly,
end all of humanity.
Exactly.
I have had the same thoughts, Aaron, specifically about Richard. I am just always impressed with how much aplomb he has.
Yeah, no, it's like you should contract that as a skill in the Zoom world, just as a
to be an operator. No, yeah, exactly. It was funny, last time with the Armenian genocide, we had those 4 Zoom bombers, and Zach didn't even realize until you called it out, Aaron, that I'd taken care of them.
Oh yeah, no, you just were like, it was like Blade Runner, it was just.
You're one of the few people that I think rightly can call themselves a multitasker, because most people think they multitask well, but no, absolutely do not.
Well, the real test, to be honest, and that's what I think you're extremely unique, Richard, in doing this, is presenting and being able to do these things, because I can't really do that. Like, I just can't. Like, it just, and by the way, that's like normal. Most people, if you're actually paying attention to presenting, you can't do it. And if you're doing the other thing, your presentation just starts to suck. You go to like you lose, like you don't even have a train of thought. You sort of stumble around. Everyone else sort of sees it. Yeah, no, it's a real thing.
All right.
So I'll tell you, I help Robert on some of his, a lot of his programs. And a lot of times I'll be handling the Q&A. You would not believe the number of people who very innocently or sincerely ask these graduate program level questions.
Oh yeah, of course.
In a Zoom meeting, and it's like, where do I start?
Exactly.
But mostly that's what I have to tell them is, start with this question and go to Google and then follow it as far as it will take you, because you could be at this for years.
Well, you bring up a good point, which I think is something a lot of people don't think about, and I didn't too much either. Is I think if you're in this type of event streaming environment, you can ask intense questions, but they need to be very single focused questions, right? You can't have this sort of a paragraph to set up the question.
No,
right?
like sometimes I've seen, well, there's the paragraph setup ones, and then there's also the ones of like, can you describe in detail the transition from George Washington to Abraham Lincoln?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, you're right. It's just
and it's like that is a graduate level question, right? They're not asking like, can you name the presidents? It's like, just, that one you can just Google and get a list. And yes, there are a number of serious changes in terms of the dynamic organization of the United States during those periods. And so you could go in and you could take 45 minutes, to just hit even just the bullet points. But like, you're just sitting there like, I can't answer this. I have a presentation to do.
That's right. No, and I think there is this dynamic, especially because because what we're doing is these series. I mean, that's what we're really doing here. And so, and we understand people have normal lives, and so you can't commit to these all on a regular basis. But if you're semi-committed to them, and we obviously appreciate that, that's why we're doing it,
Yeah.
is that, you know, there's almost like we're establishing sort of a soft social contract here, which is you know, a very European thing to do, actually. So and you know, but we need to start a new committee now, and then somehow put it into a special directive. But no,
No, but
the yeah,
the social contract is basically that, you know, you respect our time and in terms of what we can present and what we can reasonably present in view of
yeah,
the fact that it's not a one-to-one conversation, but it's
that's
a
right.
multi-party conversation, and so we can't just do everything.
Yeah, and I think
But
one of the things we're sort of hacking, or I'm maybe prototyping this, which is something maybe you could even consider at some point, Richard, is that about every 4 of these we allow, or just sort of it's organic, like the last time, a couple of weeks ago, that in normal terms, people would say that kind of went off the rails. I mean, not like in a real way, like it
no,
got
but
all integrated.
it wasn't the planned conversation you were
Yeah,
having, and
but
so it
it
became a
was a
Q&A.
cleanup, which I think is important because people build up a whole bunch of questions in these more complex, especially as you start merging recent history and current events where there's so much overlapping modern information around it, right? And it gets sort of regurgitated and re-narratized. That's not really a word, but
No, no,
maybe,
absolutely.
you
I
know,
think the next 3 conversations that I'm doing, and the next 3 lectures that I'm doing, which are World War I in the Middle East, the Turkish War of Independence, and the Caucasian Wars, absolutely have ramifications in 2022.
that's right.
And people are talking about these things because everybody, whoever thinks that they knew anything about the Middle East, is like, did you know in 1917 there was
That's
the
right. Blah, blah,
Sykes-Picot
blah.
Agreement,
Exactly.
and from that
Yes,
time on, the Middle East was ruined.
That's right.
yes.
And you're sitting there like, I spent 45 lectures explaining to you how we
Exactly.
got here. It was
No,
ruined long
and
before
that's,
Sykes-Picot.
yeah, exactly. And I think there is, especially these, as you get to the modern world, because we have more access to direct source information in our lifetimes, that's actually happening,
Yeah,
because obviously technology, but also because of modern, more democratic life, right? I mean, people do
correct.
more interviews, people do biographies. I mean, there's just more of this out there that the layering becomes it's almost like we were talking about New Hampshire as sort of a glacial or this interface area. There's just so much layering that, you know, at some point you almost have to do like a check, right? And I think, you know, and obviously that was a sort of a test a couple of weeks ago, once, like, my view is when it goes off the rails, as long as it's G and PG rated, then I'll run with it to see, you know, because obviously people have demand
Yeah,
for 40 questions.
the only thing that I would say with my Middle Eastern history series, if I do a Q&A, is I have to have people who are going to give me questions ahead of time so that we know that
Yep.
there's 5 or 6 questions, and then people will start asking other questions when it
Yeah.
happens.
So, I mean, I think one of the things you could consider is you could tee up maybe half a dozen questions going in, or 10, you know, something like that. And then people could kind of riff on those ones. Like you kind of say, these are my thematic areas that I'd like to maybe consider, because these are sort of the more consistently broad areas that people always have questions about. And then that gives people, you know, because ultimately the purpose in all of this stuff is not so, you know, we spend all this time coming up with PowerPoint decks and trying not to screw up the information and the order in our lives. It's that we're trying to sort of construct a new set of non-academic or almost amateur academic, you know, current event type symposia or seminar series that's just democratic, though. I mean, it's not like it's a professor, here's the agenda, you just show up and nod a lot, and then there's coffee time or drinks, like, which is typically the graduate seminar
Right. No,
environment.
I think, yeah, exactly. I think the whole draw to this is that you and I, Aaron, are individuals that understand these topics at a graduate level,
Yeah,
but we're not giving you a university course, which is a mono-directional transfer of
that's
material.
right.
And you
So,
also
and
have, I think this Zoom culture, and it's been exacerbated, of course, by the pandemic, but it really brings out this kind of social cultural thing,
Yep. Good
where
point.
there's a lot of the people are very sincere and are asking sincere questions and may not really understand how complex those questions and answers
Yeah.
would be. but you also have a certain number of people, and I don't think you can do anything about it, that are intent on knowing as opposed to questing. And
Yep.
I think that is damaging. That is causing a great deal of the damage that's going on in our culture right now.
Well, yeah, no, and it's actually, you're bringing up a really interesting point here. In some ways, even though this isn't really like, we're not sitting here in a manifesto saying this is what we're doing, but in a sort of indirect way, what we're sort of trying to counter a little bit is that there is a combination of, let's just call it, the social technology opinionating that
Yes.
anyone can do,
Right.
mixed with really the, let's just say the
Pop history.
yeah, the pop or the degradation of what used to be, let's say, mainline adult news and media. And I say adult, I think we all know what we mean, which is the stuff you have to put some energy in. I don't mean you have to read a foreign affairs article.
No, you're talking about
something.
things like PBS.
Right.
Yeah, because I've seen it. I mean, I love PBS and even the BBC, but I'm being honest, like one of the reasons I watch DW and France 24 more is the BBC and the PBS are, and I get it. I mean, they want a broader audience, new generations. It's not just money. It's there's a let's say a more socialization to these platforms. But then the cost to it is you don't have as much quote unquote boring news, which means there's more people watching it, but there's just less depth, let's say, in some of the coverage, and it's hodgepodge, right? I mean, it's not every PBS station.
There's less talent or even interest in discernment, which is a key to scholarship, right?
That's right.
So these people aren't really seeing themselves as scholars. Everybody wants to be a boss.
Well, everyone has a brand, right? Like
yes.
it used to be. I mean, for those of you that are familiar with that are on here that are semi-familiar with sort of the U.S. Media, the kind of the older landscape where you had these big research institutions, and you have them in the U.K. and France and so on, in Germany and the Netherlands. The shops like Brookings or AEI or just all of them out there, American Progress. It doesn't matter what side politically. You had a couple of people usually in those places that would sort of come in and out of government. They were sort of like these tastemakers almost. But the rest of the people, to be honest, were people who made a choice to maybe do a little more real world scholarship and research in these places instead of maybe in the academic world, or they just didn't want to teach or they didn't like it. And so this gave them the chance to do it. But now everybody in that world, like everybody, it has a brand, right? And they have to promote that. They have to get, the Twitter, the this or that, and that's fine. But it turns it into a much more like entertainment, tourist, top 10 list, best restaurants. Here's the menu. Oh my God, let me take an Instagram picture of this great, chorizo I just had.
And you sacrifice depth that way, Aaron.
That's right.
I don't think it's fine to sacrifice depth. I mean, if people are cruising around thinking where I'm at is fine, then that's going to cause the culture to collapse eventually, because there is no depth and there is therefore no ability to connect with other with the society one lives in.
But the thing is that historically, the majority of people were non-cultured.
That's right.
And that's like, for example, when Alexei de Tocqueville came to the United States, one of the things he noticed actually was how much more democratized culture was in the United States versus France, where in France you had 1 in 10 people who was extremely cultured and the other 9 were basically, barbarians. And then in the United States you had 10 people who were just boring.
No, I mean, look, there's almost, it's kind of an old saying. If you have a classroom of 10 students, and you have one that has an A-, do you want to spend the time with that student to help them get an A+, or do you want to help the 4 students who have, D's and F's or 3s and 4s if you're in Europe, move their way up, or ones and I should say 0s and 1s and move their way up. And
well, 0s and 1s is abject failure.
Yeah, exactly. But the point is you want to help them get to 2, right? And because you're increasing the average, like you're basically reducing the variability in the mean. And I think that is something that in some ways we're trying to do here is kind of create this newer mean where a whole bunch of people, if they watch, whatever, any of these series, and somebody says, on a TV show X, Y, or Z, or somebody, that they know says something like that in Europe about, we should do, right? The usual we should do answer. People are somewhat armed and say, well, it's not quite that simple. There's a reason that France does this or Germany does this, and you might disagree with that at a normative moral level. That's fine, but that's a different story. Like there are interlocking structures that have been agreed on, right? So they don't come from space aliens, right? They've been agreed on over generations. And you have crises which don't follow your rules. And there's almost no crises that hits anyone individually or collectively that cares about our rules or what we impose as limits. It's the crisis itself.
And the question is whether that culture can meet the moment.
That's exactly right.
Well, and I've got a few years on you guys, so I can still remember the literal chill in the pit of my stomach the first time I ever heard Al Gore talk about the democratization of information.
Yeah.
I remember.
Well, I remember that
before.
too. I mean, I'm a little older than you probably think, but but the point is no, you're right. I mean, there is a world.
I'm a little younger than you probably think, and I still remember Al Gore existing.
That's true. So you guys ready to go?
Yeah. No, I just wanted to make one final point before I do the high. The thing is that, right, that's sort of been my goal with the Middle Eastern history series, is that, look, you may not agree with what these various actors do in the Middle East. I don't agree with most of them, but they are responding to specific issues that they're discovering in their society, and they're trying to figure out, how do they move forward with all the various factors at play in their world, right? Did Mustafa Rashid Pasha, when he was thinking about Ottomanism, did he envision that the Young Turks would ever become a thing? Probably not. He died in 1860. Young Turks were 1890 at the earliest. Or, did all these different, do these actors that promote Islamism, is that what their goal is? Yes, but it's, they're anti-imperialist, they're anti-Western, they think that religion is a solution. Why do they think it's a solution? Because they go back to these sources and they say that these guys had it right. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. Maybe it's applicable, maybe it's not.
Well, and I think one of the things we always want to do is show how multi-causal and contingent so much of what the world has to deal with. And we, as both, just regular citizens and wherever that we live, but more importantly, people who are trying to sort of understand and unpack all these things, how those limits, because it's simple to say you should do this, you should do that, you shouldn't, you should, and those are easy because we do that in our personal lives, and most people don't respond to that either. So but at a larger collective level, understanding the multi-causality and the contingency that exists in these environments that lead people to, let's just say, down lots of cul-de-sacs, right?
Yeah.
And to me, that's always the thing, is how much sooner can you see that cul-de-sac that's clearly coming up, and and I think what I mean by a cul-de-sac, where you constrain all your decision making. So even if you're there, the shoulds and shouldn'ts don't even matter anymore because you're boxed in. And
right. There's only one thing to do.
And very few people realize that there's a skill involved in after the fact, going back and seeing what you predicted or what you thought was going to happen in the time. I mean, that is so undervalued, I think, in this time, in this country. But it's absolutely
I think in the
necessary.
whole world, and the last thing, I know we're going to start here, Richard, but I think in the whole world, we don't want to self-audit because we don't like vulnerability, right? Because we don't understand that actually you gain trust by exposing your vulnerability as you self-audit in your predictions or in lack of predictions, because ideally you're trying to build your own learning system, right? You're trying to build a feedback of improvement. Not everybody does that, but the people who ideally want to care about those things. But that's a thing we see in this modern, highly socially narcissistic world is people don't want to do that, and they don't understand all they're doing is degrading their trust. And I think in some ways what we're trying to do is offer enough of the complex variability for people that they can see all of these relationships and contingencies and how multi-causal it is between all of them. And so as they make a forecast or a semi prediction or a little nudge one, and it doesn't pan out, they could sit there and say, huh, you know, that didn't happen because I thought this would happen, but that didn't happen either. So yeah, I get it now. I should have
Far
thought
more
of this.
articulate. Yeah, far more
Yeah,
articulate
yeah,
than I
exactly.
was, Aaron. I mean,
Exactly.
I was trying to say that, but you made it far more articulate. So thank you.
On that note,
Yes.